police reform. Let's talk about, because the other issue that I was getting ready to list is the issue of Black Lives Matter, and South Florida is still Florida, and Florida is a very different place, and we know this is where the entire movement almost started, with Sanford, Florida, not in your district but close enough, with Trayvon Martin, and then more recently in Palm Beach Gardens. Again, that's outside of your district. For those listening, a friend of mine, Corey Jones, who was gunned down by an officer just recently this year. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So sorry. I didn't know you were his friend.
Yeah, no, I knew Corey for about somewhere between 10 and 15 years. I never really went back and put a start date on our friendship. But what are your thoughts about the Black Lives Matter movement? What are your thoughts about police reform, and particularly as it pertains to your district?
Yeah, it's a problem in my district, and it's a problem all over South Florida. A few years ago, not many years ago, just 3 or 4, there was a couple of shootings in Miami where young black men were shot to death for painting graffiti onto a building. Yeah. Punishment has to fit the crime. And unfortunately, we've seen even no crime whatsoever. Even, graffiti is what? A crime against property, but it doesn't warrant execution. And now we see a lot of black folks in this country, and we see it more and more because of cell phone cameras are everywhere. So this obviously has been going on for years, but now there's documentation of what's been happening. And, young black men mostly being slain for no reason except they're black. So, I do agree. Black Lives Matter. We have to be doing something about this, and not just tinkering. I mean, this society is suffering from racism, from an economic crisis that goes on forever. It's a combined, you could say. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about, the way racism and unrestrained capitalism and militarism were in combination, just a lethal combination. And I think you see this happening. And, let me try to unpack it a little bit. This is a big topic, and, where do you start and where do you finish? I'll say I've been against the war on drugs. And I mention that because the war on drugs becomes a pretext for this kind of police surveillance, especially of the African American community, but also Hispanics, Native Americans. If the police were to be doing the stop and frisk in white neighborhoods, like even wealthy white neighborhoods, Wall Street, Beverly Hills, of course, they'd be finding probably more drug possession in those neighborhoods than they find typically in an African American poor neighborhood. But it becomes a pretext for this surveillance that is imposed in a very racially and ethnically discriminatory fashion. And we should stop the war on drugs. It's been going on way too long. It's not been effective. It's been an abysmal failure. And this is another big difference between myself and Wasserman Schultz. She hasn't even been able to come out in favor of medical marijuana. And this state had a referendum 2 years ago where medical marijuana fell short just by a little bit. It needed 60% of the vote to pass. It got 58%, I believe. And she was dead set against it. I've been for medical marijuana for years. I'm for decriminalizing it. Miami-Dade and Broward counties have both taken steps in the right direction by at least giving the police the discretion to issue summonses for the first 3 offenses for the possession of minor amounts of marijuana. The federal government should deschedule marijuana from its controlled substance list. It should allow the states to be the laboratories of change and of reform. And, I do applaud that the Democratic Party now has this in its platform. And, of course, that is thanks to the Bernie Sanders delegates. The federal government should be out of the business of criminalizing drug use. It should be seen as a public health problem. And this society really needs to be providing a vibrant job market for all of its citizens from the ground up, from the bottom up, so that folks don't even have any need to go into the drug trade just to make ends meet or because they don't see any other avenue in life that's worthwhile. And at the same time, police departments need to be reformed. They have to more reflect the neighborhoods that they actually patrol. We need body cameras on police to record this stuff. The police departments have gotten very militarized at the same time that our society has, between video games and everything else, violent video games, that is. From very young age, Americans get very desensitized to violence, and we see an awful lot of violence on TV, and from a very young age. And, you know, when law enforcement is patrolling in very difficult circumstances, they really are. But you get a lot of law enforcement folks who just are not properly trained, and many of them have racial biases. And you know, these problems are pervasive, and not just to South Florida. Obviously, this is a nationwide problem, really every corner of this country.
Thank you for placing into the context of that conversation not only the criminal justice reforms, not only the police reforms, but also economic reforms that would help fix some of the problems that lead to crime in the first place. A lot of people like to conveniently discuss the racial component, but never discuss the economic component, which actually could alleviate much of the crime that we find in impoverished communities. So thank you so much for that.